Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. I'm a social entrepreneur, speaker, mother, and business owner, and I'm here because I believe in you, and I want you to live your full potential. My mission with this podcast is simple: to offer you perspectives, tools, and inspiration to help you live with more courage, rebuild after setbacks, and strengthen yourself from the inside out. So each week, I talk to thought leaders, authors, experts, and everyday amazing people who share their stories and outlooks that help you get from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you have something great inside of you, but you just aren't sure how to bring it to life? Do you ever need some clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be? I'm so excited to share a free guide I created just for you. This tool has helped me in my own times of struggle and doubt. It's called Your Future Self Guide. This mini course includes a future self visualization I recorded, a series of journal questions, and some insights from me about overcoming self-doubt and embracing self-leadership. You can download it for free at jessicalindberg.com/futureself. That's jessicalindberg.com/futureself. Let's get back to the show. Welcome to today's Becoming Heartstrong. My guest today is Elizabeth Marth Tarara. Elizabeth is a transformational growth coach and founder of Sacred Freedom, an agency for spiritual healing that specializes in the facilitation and expansion of midlife awakenings and soul-led design. She's certified in a number of proprietary approaches to process emotional blocks and trauma. Her deep understanding of the real-life consequences of losing touch with one's own sacred self continues to influence her work. And I am fortunate enough to know Elizabeth in real life and know what a wise soul she is. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much, Jessica.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You have such a deep and beautiful approach to life. And I'm just curious, as we get started, like, how did you decide to become a transformational coach? Like, what mission or calling within you led you to this space?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have always been doing some sort of personal or emotional work um, since I honestly was like a teenager. My mom was kind of just real force of that in my life, and
Mm.
so always had an interesting interest in the emotional and the spiritual. But I was an interior designer then for like 20 years. I had my own practice and loved the process of taking something that wasn't in its full potential and watching the
Mm.
transformation and being a part of that transformation to really get it, like whether it was beautiful or comfortable or like whatever the end like result was desired. And I loved that. And then the other piece is I loved connecting with my clients. Like I love the connection, the personal level. And so personally, some things had gone on. We had some illness within our family and some deaths, and I knew that I needed to go deeper into my own personal journey, doing some work. And so I came into shadow work training, which I came to it through Debbie Holcomb, who's a local in our community. And then her, the work that she does is through Cliff Berry. And so that was really my intro into becoming, I decided I was going to become trained in shadow work. And then that opened up like my doors into spiritual and emotional, facilitation, and then conscious uncoupling and the other different modalities that I do.
So I'm just curious because you said it. People might be like, well, what is shadow work? Like, what does that mean? Can you share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. And what I've really come to understand, the different wording or modalities that include shadow work, it's really, there is a difference like between different
Okay.
things, but essentially it's based on Carl Jung's idea that there's a piece of us, a part of us that we keep in shadow, that we don't necessarily show the rest of the world, that there's a piece of us that we either may not like or that we don't want to acknowledge or that we've repressed generally a piece of us from childhood, right? But it's like a way that got us through the different situations in our lives. And so there's good like in our shadows. There's good, um, there's the pieces of ourselves we may not want to acknowledge or like don't like have so much to teach us and have so much light to shed
Hmm.
on who we are. So it's really integrating um, all the different pieces of ourselves or the parts of ourself is the
Hmm.
easiest way to describe it in one fashion.
So would you say or agree with this idea that when you kind of know the full spectrum of yourself, like then you really know yourself? It's kind of acknowledging it's like a fullness that maybe a lot of us are missing.
Absolutely. It's the whole self, right? Like so some people may be really comfortable um just to share this. So Cliff Ferry has
Yeah.
come in with a modality that there's four archetypes. So it would be like warrior, magician, sovereign, and lover. And in those, then there's three main types under those. So
Hmm.
say you could have like 12 different types of a self, and you feel really comfortable in six of those, but the other six you don't really, you're not comfortable with your anger, you're not comfortable confronting somebody, right? Like so
Mm-hmm.
you stay back. Well, the integration part would be to get you unblocked from whatever is uncomfortable with confronting somebody in a respectful, honoring way to step into your
Sure.
power. And so then that would
Mm-hmm.
bring you more online with that piece of you when you needed to use that in a situation. And
Hmm.
another example would be say you're not really comfortable with the emotional side. So crying or being vulnerable isn't something that you feel really comfortable with. And we would then look at like what's blocking you or what's a risk for you to step into that and then work through a process of that and then integrate that more so that you can have more intimate relationships both with yourself and with others because you
Mm-hmm.
can be real and comfortable and raw in your emotion.
Hmm. That's very cool. That's so interesting. I think, I wonder, probably for this and then other things that we're going to talk about today, do people sometimes arrive at they feel the need to dig into these some things because there's something external going on in their life, but the reality is that it's really something within them? It's like we oftentimes we're like, oh, I'm having a problem in my marriage or with my kids or at work. And so we see the problem as external to us, but really it's like a something inside of us. Would that be kind of the impetus for people coming to this kind of
So
work?
it's exactly that. So
Yeah.
in my belief, and a lot of others who are in this work, like everything that is outside of us is a mirror to what's going on inside. So
Hmm.
whether it's a projection or a mirror, it's all really our perspective. It's our, whatever our experience it is, whatever our mindset is, whatever our emotional baseline is. So when something's going on, it's an opportunity like for us to really dig deeper. So when people come into
Hmm.
this work, generally something in their external world, whether it's a death, whether it's a loss, whether it's an illness, whether it is um, a life-changing event, right? And they
Hmm.
don't like how it feels inside and they don't necessarily
Hmm.
know where to go with that. And so it's being able to look at these external experiences as opportunities, I believe, from God or the universe to be like, hey, like let's do some
Hmm.
work and we can bring some integration here so like you feel more whole and you feel more like within yourself. Like I believe every experience is an opportunity for us to learn from and grow from.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I believe the same thing. You, so you're, seems like you're focusing on women in midlife. And I'm just curious, like, why you, I mean, I think I might
Yeah.
know, but like, why you want to focus in this population and like, what are you noticing that's like a unique need of women at this stage of their life?
Yeah, so I think that became my focus because that was me, right? We
Hmm.
often like share and teach what we know, like what is going on with us,
Hmm.
right? So the main catalyst of where I knew this was my calling. I had been in shadow work for a few years, and then my mom got ill and passed,
Mm,
and my
mm,
world just completely shifted. And not
sure.
necessarily in the ways that one would think. Of course, like there was the missing her, and there was like, you're a parent dying, especially a mother dying, affects us so very, very much. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll say for me, if there was this huge change, and because of how I had created my life and also learned how to be, I wasn't like a self, like I was an extension of
Mm,
my mother. So then I
hmm.
created a lot of my life to not necessarily be a full self in. So I wasn't necessarily a full self in my marriage, I wasn't a full self as a parent, I wasn't a full self as a friend or as a woman. And so I'm
Mm,
42 at this point, and I like realized that making a decision that was really based on myself, I didn't know how even to do that or
mm,
what that fully looked like. And so it was really this journey of connecting to myself in a spiritual and emotional way and learning more about myself. And so through that journey and through where I am now, I've noticed, whether it comes through like just what I said, whether it comes through divorce or loss of something or death or change, oftentimes this is occurring kind of in the middle of our journey. And whether it starts in your
mhm,
30s or your 50s or wherever, but at some
mhm,
point, you're different than you were in your teens and your 20s or before you had kids. And I think that so often, like this part of life, this piece of life was like, oh well, she's just having a midlife crisis or he's just having a midlife crisis.
mm,
And I think it's like, no, it's just there's an awakening that there's more, like that you actually are listening now. Something happened that awakened the piece of your soul that is like, I'm no longer going to continue doing things the way that I was doing them in the status quo. Like something needs to change in a good way, right? Like not like in a desperate
mhm,
way, but like, wow, like what are the other possibilities for me to grow? Like
mhm,
what
mhm,
is my soul's purpose from here? And that doesn't have to be a radical life change. It can just be a small piece. But I think even to be aware of the awakening. And so I think that's kind of why I focus on that, because I think that a lot of times, and it's not just women, I work with men too. And but I, because I'm a woman and I think I have a heart for
mm,
women, um, and I've seen them just repress it because society or people or
mhm.
family or whatever, whom, people love the familiar. They don't love change. They like everything to
Sure.
stay as status quo and like just be content with what you have and just be happy with what you have. And so like this desire and this passion and this, what I believe is a God calling, is like
Mhm.
suppressed kind of.
Depressed.
And I think
Yeah.
to awaken to that and to say, hey, no, this is actually happening. You're not crazy. Like you actually are feeling what you're
Mhm.
feeling for a reason, because God's calling you to your next journey. So I
Thing.
think that's where
Yeah.
that midlife awakening and working with women in that piece just holds such a special piece of my heart.
Yeah. Well, I think it's I don't know if you know who Richard Rohr is, but he's kind
Love
of a spiritual teacher, and he talks about the first half of life and the second half of life, and he even says that you can get to your second half of life. It's not an age thing. You could be
it.
young, but it's sort of that awakening, and he talks a lot about that. It's really suffering. I mean, we think that our culture, our human nature is we want good and easy and fun, and those are all very important parts of life. But the truth of of that, which I have noticed in myself, is like it's really the suffering that's the
Mhm.
clarifier and gives us this opportunity. I would say it's like an invitation to wake up and to become who we're created to be. And so it's like if you're listening and you're at a stage in your life where things are really challenging and you're feeling really low and you're like, what in the heck is either going to happen next or what do I do next? This is a really exciting time in your life, actually, because you're at the precipice of an opportunity to like maybe become more fully who you're created to be. Right? I
Absolutely.
mean,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think and it's not an easy journey. I mean, there's no like toxic positivity going on here.
No, and I don't think it's everybody's journey in this lifetime. You know, I
True.
think that, some some people like, it's not right. Like you have to, because a lot of
Mhm.
times you're going to leave the known. You're going to leave what is
Mm.
familiar. You're going to leave
Mhm.
what is a perceived safety and security because it's no longer in your
Mhm.
highest good or in the highest good of all those around. So it can be stepping into the unknown. It can be stepping into
Mhm.
trusting something outside of yourself, right?
Mhm.
And trusting that there's a greater picture, and that's scary, and it can be
That's
lonely,
scary.
and it can be all the things that
Mhm.
we as humans don't like to experience. And
Totally.
that's why I think it's not a journey that everybody's ready for in this
Mhm.
lifetime, you know?
Yeah. What do when someone comes to you and they're in this space of like noticing all of these things, and sometimes it's like and I don't know if you notice this more in women or men because I'm a woman, so I guess I'm
Mhm.
going to share from like
Yeah.
my lens, but we want to change or we feel it's time to change, but like I always say like women are like the quarterbacks of everything, like our communities, our families, like we're kind of a stabilizing force. And so the thought of change is so scary because how how is that going to sort of like unearth everything around us and everyone around us? Do you think women tend to stay, I don't want to say small or less, or kind of keep things the way they are because they're would rather not like upset the apple cart, so to speak, because so much is impacted by who we are and how we like move in the world?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that women feel such a responsibility for
Mm.
so many dynamics in their lives. And
Mhm.
I think that's
Mhm.
also like a taught behavior. I think it's a conditioned
Mm.
behavior. I think that comes socially. I think that comes religiously. I think that comes
Mm.
um, just like within our families. And I
Mm.
think it, you know, my opinion, I think it comes from having this codependency factor that we're also taught this is how you're good. This is what a woman is expected
Mm.
to do. If you don't do those things, you're not like a great upstanding member of society. If you switch those things out, if you have different things. And so I think so oftentimes we
Mm.
have these conditioned stereotypes. And I think to even butt against that in a small way can cause a lot of um, ripples that a lot of people don't feel comfortable stepping into.
Mhm. Well, I'm just curious, like, what are some of those, stereotypes or conditionings that you most notice women struggle with and maybe do really want to bust through, but are petrified to do it?
So I think the biggest things that I see are relationships and finances. Um, I
Mm.
think that, for a typical family structure where you have like a woman and a partner and
Mhm.
I'm going to say kids. I'm just going to go kind of
Mhm.
with
Sure.
or a family of some
Mhm.
sort. Um, there's a perceived and a real. It goes both ways. Like responsibility
Sure.
of each person has their role, and so if a woman's wanting to change her role or her role has been changed, right? Because a lot of people that I work with have
Mhm.
faced a change, right? It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the people that are going along and everything's status quo and kosher who are coming to me because they want to change their
Mhm.
lives, right? It's really
Sure. There's an impetus for that
something
change.
happened.
Yeah.
They're either their husband
Mhm.
left them, they want to leave their husband, like they got diagnosed with cancer and their life is like facing them. Their kids have left the house. So there
Mhm.
is there is an impetus of change and there's that
Mhm.
motivation of things can't necessarily go back to how they were, even if I want them to.
Mhm.
And so
Sure.
it's looking at that piece of saying, hey, listen, like you only knew yourself in this role. You only knew yourself as this. This was like what you taught. You either worked a full-time job and came home and took care of the kids. And then, you never had any time for yourself. I see this with women all the time. Well, I don't have any
Mm.
time. There's no time for myself. That's not actually true. It's just, it's the truth that you're telling yourself, that other people are telling yourself, and it's the truth that you're living. So part of my job,
Mm.
and apply that to any situation, right? A woman who's
Sure.
just either decided to leave her husband or left her husband, life is going to look a lot different, right? Because there's so many different dynamics that are going to go into that. So it's really coming into, first of all of your external circumstances aren't your source. The only source
Mm.
is for, in my work and what I teach, is God.
Mm.
So like coming back and really starting the foundation in that piece. And I guess that's goes back to your original question of breaking those stereotypical ideas or anything else, conditions,
Mhm.
comes back to really knowing that God is your source, and then like figuring out what actually is true for you. Like setting aside all the
Mhm.
noise. Like
Mhm.
yes, you very well may have been created to be a mom and a wife and a partner and all of these things, and that is your sole purpose. You're fulfilled,
Mhm.
right? Generally
Mhm.
those aren't the people that I'm speaking with, though.
That you're
There's something
seeing.
missing.
Yeah.
There's something that they feel is they want more, but they don't feel that they can have it because they never believed that they really could. And so that's where I come in
Mhm.
to say, no, hey, let's get you in touch with yourself. Let's actually
Mhm.
have you believing that you are a divine creation, like with a purpose, with several
Mhm.
purposes. I mean, not just one purpose, like, but let's
Sure.
let's discover where your next part of your journey is. Is that answering your
Because we're
question?
all so many
Yeah.
things, right? Like we put ourselves in these silos of roles. Like you said, culture does, family does. And I also have reflected, like, interestingly, I think corporate America has done this to women and families. And I say this as a person whose husband worked in corporate America for 17 years and is now working for himself. I saw the way they ran their business and
Mhm.
what they required of him almost forced me into a role that I never signed up
Yeah.
for. And necessarily, like, we didn't say, okay, Jessica, this is the job description. Would you like to have it? It was like the only way to survive was if one person filled all of those roles and he went to work for, every hour they wanted him. And then, the phone started ringing at 6:30 in the morning. And I think nothing became more clear that through COVID, right? The women stayed home and sat at the counter and did the job and taught the children, and men were going to go to work and companies were just going to keep going. And I'm not, necessarily criticizing corporate America and people's jobs, because people are doing the best that they can in those spaces. Like, my husband's goal has always been to provide for his family, and that's his role. But like, it's almost like we were like, wait a second, these aren't the roles that we want to have. And I'm lucky enough to be with someone who's okay with changing those
Mhm.
roles. But I just, sometimes we think we get on autopilot in our culture and we're just like, this is it. But then all of us are like driving around being like, is this all there is? It's like, that's the truth. And so I love that you're giving people permission to say, wait a second, this might not be all there is. And maybe there's more. And I just think that's just that even little bit of permission is like transformational for people.
Well, I think it is. And I think the other piece is exactly what you just said, is the awareness. If you're consciously
Mm-hmm.
choosing what you're doing and that role is bringing you fulfillment, awesome. But when
Great.
we're on
Yep.
autopilot and we're doing things that aren't in alignment, and when I say in alignment, like alignment for me is like really like true to our heart and like in our God, like God-given soul purpose. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a space for that, right? Like there's a
Sure.
space
Sure.
for that. But like to live,
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it should be sustainable. And I don't believe you live every area of your life in that. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're
Mm-hmm.
aware that, yeah, I'm consciously choosing this for a little while because this is what feels good to me for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll see what the next step from that is. But when we go on autopilot and then like you wake up and you're like, wait, I didn't even like, how am I here? Like
Mm-hmm.
then that's where it is. So it's creating the intention and the consciousness around it as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the self, and I was going to ask you about this a little later in the conversation, but I feel like this is a good spot. And we talk about the self a lot in our culture, and I think people have different reactions to that word depending on, what you believe and how you grew up and maybe how old you
Mhm.
are. Um, and then you talked about, so, that relationship to God. And I'm just wondering if you would like share for you,
Mhm.
and obviously we're not telling anyone else what yours has to be. This is, everyone gets to kind of arrive at this on their own. And I'm even happy to share like my point,
Yeah.
how this sits with me. Like, how does that fit the self and God and for you, and how it sort of leads you, how you lead yourself, I guess, in that space?
Yeah. So for me, like the self is really like can be described as like the higher soul self. So there's
Mhm.
the idea of God, like a higher soul self, and then like
Mhm.
our our human self. Um, and I
Mhm.
guess like the self for me is when they're all connected. So when I feel like
Mm.
I'm in my human is connected to my spirit, which is connected to God. And from a very young age, like I I didn't know, but I knew that like God was in me. Like and I mean
Mhm.
that gets distorted throughout our
Sure.
journeys of growing. And for me, I grew up in a Christian household, but a very eclectic Christian household, right? So like
Mhm.
um but there's this idea that God is somehow outside of us. But I mean, even,
Mhm.
like even in the Bible and when you can, I'm just using this as an example, like we are never separated from God. Well, if we're never separated from God,
Mhm.
then God's within me. And so when I talk about the self,
Mhm.
it's never in a selfish way. I don't believe the self can be selfish when it's in its most connected, aligned space, because for me, it's
Mhm.
connected like to God. So it's
Mhm.
serving what is God's like purpose for us, which then is a purpose for the collective. Does that make so?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
never when I talk about the self, it is the self. I believe like that self has to come, but it's about a divine connection that then is going to serve a greater good, a
Mhm.
greater population.
Right. It's like almost, I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day on the podcast, and she's a yoga instructor, and she was talking about how, she protects her energy a lot because she serves a lot of people, and she has to make sure she's good in her heart and in her soul so that she can serve other people. And she was really big on the fact that, because she'll even say this, like sometimes in the yoga world things can be quite
Sure.
self-focused, but she's like, it's a bigger self. It's not just your little self, it's your big self. And when you focus on that, it actually makes you a better citizen and mother and server of others because you're whole within yourself. And I think it sounds to me like that's what you're saying when you say I mean, I guess I kind of think of like the big self and the little self,
Yeah.
like the big self, like the connected self. Um, is that kind of what you
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think for me that it's so and gosh, there's so many different ways to describe that, right? And so
So
each
many.
person can
Yeah.
really come to it themselves. But I
Hmm.
think it's where also like knowing yourself, like knowing who you are, like as a person, individual. So what you're saying, what your friend was saying, because then that's gonna be the best for everyone around you. Like because it
Hmm.
ripples
Hmm.
out and obviously that can that's a deep topic that could be a whole other thing
It's a
on
deep
itself,
topic.
right?
Right.
But
Right.
I think that's at the foundation. But I'd love to hear like
Of the
your
fun.
ideas. You said you were gonna, yeah, you'd be open.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share a lot of the same ideas with you. I think, and I'm going to go back to Richard Rohr again because I love him so much, but he talks about like a mirroring of God's love to us, that God, like that the fact that God lives within us and that he's just mirroring back his immense love to us. And so that's how we should love ourselves. And so it's not like a selfish love, it's actually divine because that's how we were created. And I think that I think that's a hard thing in our human minds, I think, for me to even some sort of grasp. But I think I mean, I feel very much, I feel like God is living within me. And and I'm created in God's image. So, and I kind of believe that I'm just a vessel here. This is my physical body. This is my, bodysuit, I even say sometimes. And so there is like a divine purpose for this bodysuit in this time and space. And so when I'm most connected to God within myself, then I'm also going to be most whole and most connected to what the purpose is for my life. And these are hard and big concepts, but it's something that I think about regularly because I want to be that connected, because I think that's like the fastest path to being who we're created to be. And I want to be that highest version of myself.
And it's so
So I
true.
think,
I mean, one of the things, and the only reason, like, I'm going to quote this, and it's from the Bible again, and that's not necessarily the space where I'm in so much of my
mm,
spirituality right now, but I believe this with all my heart and soul. You know, the first command, they say the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your
mm,
heart, but the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. So the concept
mm,
is, like, it is so blatant, and loving
mm,
ourselves, and true love, like, not like selfish love, not
mhm,
but like loving, which so many people, that's another thing that I teach that is so important, like the actual, like,
mhm,
practices and different things of self love, like self transformational
mhm,
love, is really the only way you're going to be able to, like, love another human being. And if we all had that,
mhm,
and then, like, that
mhm.
rippled, I mean, how different would our world look?
World B. Yeah.
But it's such a, it is, like you said, it's a concept that seems so large, but at the heart of it, it's also, like, fundamentally so important for each human to know. And I
Mhm,
just feel like if that could be a piece of it, like, of our human
mhm.
experience, like, the world would just look entirely different.
It would look entirely different. Well, I mean, you even see it. Let's just talk about it, like, as an example in families, right? You have children who are blessed to be in families where they're loved. They are different children,
Absolutely.
and then kids who do not have that privilege. And it's not, and both of those children are equally
Mhm.
good and wonderful and loved humans, but they don't experience that love. And so then it plays out in the way that they are in the world, right, in a different way. And so I always think about, if I'm struggling with like self-love, I always think about how much I love my
Yes.
kids. And then I think to myself, well, I mean, I love them more than I could ever even quantify or qualify or whatever words. And perhaps like God loves me and them more than, I mean, in a bigger and more expansive way. I mean, that to me is like, that kind of pulls me back into centering myself, I guess, in that space. But I love that concept. And it's like, it sounds, I think sometimes people in the world and culture, when they talk about love, it's like foofy and,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, well, it's like, no, it's actually really tangible and like gritty and important and fundamental. It's not this just, it's so foundational. Um, it's like we miss that, I think.
I agree. And I think that is I mean, I think it gets such a, like you said, foofy, like, almost airheadish, or like,
Yeah.
superficial concept. And yet, when you really think about self love, that's the work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm.
like, you want to talk
Yeah.
about having to, like, get into the
So
nitty
true.
gritty, and, like, look
Mm-hmm.
at doing that. And, like, I'll only speak for
Mm.
myself, but I've certainly made mistakes, and certainly have things where I'm like, I can't love that. I mean, self
Mm-hmm.
love, like, love in and of itself is like a, I mean, it's a concept that I believe there's spiritual grace that comes around it. But I
Sure.
mean, we've we've got it backwards, I think, you know?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You mentioned before about relationships. So like people will come to you and they're at maybe a transition in their relationship, let's just say with a partner or a spouse. And so one of the things that you're certified in that I wanted to ask you about is conscious uncoupling, because I think it's such an interesting topic. Excuse me. An interesting topic, and in sort of a revolutionary way to think about maybe a separation. um Seems to me that so many of them are so toxic and negative, and perhaps people just get to the point where they just can't take it anymore, I'm sure. But talk to us about conscious uncoupling and like what it is and how people use it. Like, where did that idea come from?
Absolutely. So, Catherine Woodward Thomas is a licensed marriage and family therapist who developed this concept. Um, Gosh, I don't know how many years ago now, but she wrote the book Conscious Uncoupling, and it is really a process that people can use. It's an individual process that is to separate in an amicable, respectful, honoring way. And of course, in any separation, really who it is meant to benefit the most is the children, right? It's really
Sure.
meant to set a foundation for kids to understand that divorce, separation, whatever the process may be, like doesn't have to be horrible and ugly and mean and like divide their family and like ruin lives. Um, and
Hmm.
you know, this is a revolutionary approach and it is making waves. Like I hear so many more people consciously uncoupling without even doing like a conscious uncoupling program, right? Just really
Sure.
doing it
Hmm.
in a respectful, kind manner. And really, what it's about is looking at how we are showing up. So just that idea of self-love, again, it's turning at the process. If everything's a mirror or a projection of what's going on, and I have a relationship that's not working out, I'm using myself as an example just to like,
Hmm.
if
Sure.
if I have a relationship that isn't working out, then looking at it from not blaming and shaming my partner, but seeing what
Mm-hmm.
my part in it is. So, you know, if something horrible happened from my partner, well, where did I give away my power? Where did I not use my voice? Where, what are some of my wounds that I may not have addressed that I felt I wasn't worthy or I wasn't good enough or I didn't
Mm-hmm.
deserve something and I didn't speak up? And so it's looking at, Catherine talks about like owning our 3%. And it doesn't, that's just like a number, right? But it's being able to see my part in it, because it's really only when we let go of the idea of I'm a victim, this is happening to me, and that can lead in any situation of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a space to hold that feeling, there's a time to hold that, there's a
Sure.
space to be in that. And when you're ready to change doesn't come from that space, right? We have to step into an
Mm-hmm.
empowered space in order to create something different. So that's where we look at what our part is, because really we can only change what we're responsible for. So then
Mm-hmm.
it's looking at that and saying, hey, yeah, I now we, in the conscious uncoupling process, then you look at your wounds, you look at, some of the old beliefs that you were believing and maybe showing up in some of the ways that you were showing up, and then doing some healing work around that, learning what the truths actually are, like you are worthy, you are good enough, you do get to use your voice, you do get to be seen, you do matter, your thoughts matter, what you desire matters. um and like kind of thinking about how you could have done it differently. And it's a lot about forgiveness. It's a lot about forgiveness of the self. It's about forgiveness of the other person and recognizing like maybe where they were and maybe they can't
Mm-hmm.
change, right? But then letting that energy
Mm-hmm.
go, like letting, blaming
Mm-hmm.
and shaming and resentment, working through it, like working through what those things are, but then letting it go, because at the end of the day, especially if you have kids, it's not going to serve anyone. And so it's creating, it's also the idea that when I change my energy, that's going to have a effect on the person with whom I'm separating from, whether or not they are doing the program or not. And so again, it's a very conscious, intentional, aware process. And it it does change, it changes the game. I mean, it really, I have had women who were angry and just vengeful, right? And like when we turn it
Mm-hmm.
around and look at how, you know they may just not have been aware of some of their wounds and how they can show up differently for themselves, right? Because that's what it's about. It's showing up differently for
Yeah.
yourself, so then you can show up different in relationship and you can create something different. And then it's also noticing like, hey, what, this goes back to talking about what you were talking about, like in a conversation we were having before we started this. Like, how can you be
Mm-hmm.
your best self? How can you show up as your
Mm-hmm.
best self, regardless of how anybody else is going to show up? What's going to make
Right.
you feel good about you? What's going to have you at the end of the day having self love and self respect? Because then that's what you're showing not only your kids, but other people in the world. I'm working with this couple right now. Because you can also do it as a couple, how they're doing this process, like everyone around them is like, wow, like this is so different.
Mm-hmm.
This is so life changing. We love how you guys are doing this. That goes out like that, like
Sure.
changes. We're
It's
like, yeah,
rippled.
oh, we don't have to necessarily do this in a really angry, hateful way, because who does that feel good for?
Right. No one. Yeah.
You
Do people typically come, like that's one of the questions, as a couple, or can one person just come and say, I'm in this really tenuous situation. We're all pissed off, all of us. Like, I don't want to live in this energy. Like, how does that usually unfold? Do if both people aren't, I guess, coming to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, originally, Catherine designed it for just the individual. Like it wasn't meant to be
Okay.
done as a couple. Um,
Okay.
so it really is formatted like for the one person so that you don't have to have somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, right? Like you get to
Mm-hmm.
control of like how you are going to be and how you are going to do this. And then that is going to set like the tone, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
now, saying that, she is developing like a way to do it for couples, and then there are those of us coaches who do it with couples. And so I
Mm-hmm.
do it both ways. I do it individually and I do it with couples, but I have more and more couples coming with me or coming to me to want to do it together. So there's benefits to both sides, but that's, you do
Mm-hmm.
not need the other person to do this work.
Hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. Do you find if people come to you, I guess especially in a couple situation is the way I'm thinking, and they go through some of this stuff, is there a scenario or that where they're like, wait a second, we actually do want to be together, we just never did this work?
Absolutely. That's one of the, I try to say like with conscious uncoupling, like it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be an uncoupling, right? What you are uncoupling from
Mhm.
is what you had, right? Like you're uncoupling from
Oh,
whatever the
okay.
situation, whatever the relationship that wasn't working, let's uncouple from that. Let's
Mm.
create something new. Like what didn't work and what do you want? And then we can absolutely, if two people want to do that together, we can absolutely
Sure, of
create
course.
that. So it's certainly, there's people that come that don't know what they want. They know they're having trouble in their
Mhm.
relationship. And like, so what is the next step? So, conscious uncoupling, you can uncouple from anything that just isn't right and you want to do it
Mhm.
differently, whether that
Yeah,
be like, I mean, anything in your life.
sure. So I guess a couple things are coming to mind. I mean, one is how wonderful would it be if people were considering some of these ideas prior to marriage, let's say, to making that commitment? I mean, would they be wholer versions of themselves and then in their relationship? I mean, do you ever think about that when you're working with
You know
people?
what? I do, but I love just when you were saying that, I'm like, gosh, like, yes, that, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
because I think, um, I mean, for me, when I got married, like these concepts weren't in my mind, even though I had been reading
No.
books and I had, I wanted to like do it differently than what I had seen, but even what I
Mhm.
was doing didn't like I didn't understand the depth of it, right? Like as
Mhm.
now. So So I think when you can understand where you are showing up in a relationship, because relationships are like our best mirrors of ourselves, right? Like we were talking about that,
Mm-hmm.
because they can bring out
Mm-hmm.
our triggers, they can bring out our insecurities, they can bring out the best side, right? They really show us where we can grow, like, and where we can
Mm-hmm.
learn. And to know ourselves more as like before we even got into a relationship, right? And to like kind of do some of that
Mm-hmm.
work. And then, you know, there's a lot in conscious uncoupling. We talk about agreements, we talk about unspoken agreements, we talk about things like that, like to get that on the table before, and then be
Mm.
able to continue that conversation like throughout your journey of marriage together, and have like this kind of guideline on communication, intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I think that that would be a great precedence.
Be a great tool. Yeah, I think it would too. Why do you think most people end their relationships? Like, what do you see when people come to you? Like, there, these breaking points. Do you see any sort of through lines or trends in them that you're like, this is something that comes up a lot?
Honestly, Jessica, I think the through line for everything is communication. And I
Mm.
think what that can also go to, but like it goes on so many deep levels, and it comes back to like knowing
Mm-hmm.
yourself. Like so that
Mm-hmm.
often people that I, you know, this is just my experience and like what
Mm.
I,
Sure. Yeah, just your experience.
you know, they they don't necessarily fully know and understand themselves in their in
Mm.
when they're first in a relationship, and when they first get married, and then they discover these different things. And so maybe there wasn't full communication within themselves, first of all, right? Like they didn't know how to either be
Mm.
totally honest with themselves, or they like self-abandoned, and like, you know, because of our wounds, like we don't think we matter and other people
Sure.
matter, and we have codependency issues and like all these different things.
Mm.
and and then, you know, over time there stops being like this communication, whether it's emotional communication, intimate communication, sexual communication. And it's like there's just a lack that, like, when we don't, so I don't just mean talking, like, I mean, like, truly feeling,
Sure.
understanding, like, connecting. And that's the piece. Like, when we
Mm.
stop communicating on a level, then there stops being the connection. And then I think when those two pieces come, then everything else can come and pull people away.
Mm-hmm. My mom is a career counselor. She helps people in career transition. And we did a podcast together, and she works with a lot of people who are just kind of get to the place in their life where like, oh my gosh, I cannot do this one more minute. I need to do something different. And really, it's always a journey of self-discovery at that point. It's a lot of the things that we're talking about. And her and I had a conversation. I said, what we do with our young people is we ask them what they want to be, but we don't ask them who they are. And I think we do that in relationships and in marriages. It's like, oh, I want to find a person and I want to have a house together, and it's like, it's all this external stuff that looks so wonderful. I do think we're wired for connection as humans and to find that intimacy. Like we desire that. And I think that it makes us better. And it's a wonderful gift of life. But as a culture and as a world, like we don't help our young people cultivate who they are in themselves, which would make them more aligned in their work and what they choose to do with their life, and more aligned with a partner that they would choose or with whatever it is. And I like the longer I live and the more I do the different things that I do, I think people struggle in leadership because they don't know who they are. It's like this fundamental need. And I don't know, I just like listening to you, it just makes it so much more apparent. Like in order to build a better world, like people need to know who they
Mhm.
are and then learn about their own value. And like from there, like, I think people are more fulfilled. And I think we're getting there. I think there's more of awareness in like our generation than there was in our parents' generation. I think there's more in younger people than there was in our generation. Like I think it's getting better, but it's like such a gaping hole that is in some ways so
Yeah.
simple, but it's like we can't even see
Yeah.
it.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that society conditioned it that way for a reason. Like, I mean, I think
Mm.
that like to have a real
Okay.
knowledge of yourself and power within yourself isn't necessarily conducive to um, living in a controlled society, right? So, I mean, I think that
Mm.
somewhere throughout the
Okay.
ages, like hundreds of
I can see
years,
that.
it was just
Yeah.
really conditioned to like, you know, to have power within yourself. And again, not a punitive power, like a divine power,
Sure. Divine
like
power. Yeah.
used for the good of all. Um, I think
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, just in my opinion, I think that it has been conditioned to be more about what you're doing and like
Mm-hmm.
what what looks good out here and not spending as much time as
Mm.
in here, because
Mm-hmm.
really part of the truth is when we all go in here and we all find like our divine purpose and our divine power and everything, I mean that changes the world, and then that
Mm-hmm.
causes disruption. So I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
that I think that you're right. I think things are changing. Things are, you know, things are shifting. Absolutely. Because they're supposed
Mm-hmm.
to.
Because they're supposed to. So I'm curious, of this work that you do and how you observe the world through the people that you work with. Like, how does it make you think about parenting? I mean, you have children, and I'm not asking specifically about your kids necessarily or what you're doing, but just in general, like how can we take some of these concepts as a parent, if a parent's listening, and do what could we do to sort of be better at that? Because we always want to be better at that, but help our kids, you know themselves more or just shift. Because sometimes there's like this parent child relationship, and those are all different dynamics, which could be a whole other podcast, right? But just in making me think about this, it's like I want to empower my kids in some of these ideas. And so, just do you have any thoughts for mothers or fathers that might be listening?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I started to do, and by no means do it perfectly. This is a growth journey every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But was like
Mm-hmm.
seeing my kids. Like, I don't mean seeing them
Mm-hmm.
like visually, I mean like seeing who they
Sure.
are, like listening to
Wow.
them, like learning from them. There's an
Mm-hmm.
amazing book, and it's called The Conscious Parenting. I highly recommend
Yes.
it. Um, like
Mm-hmm.
there's an idea that our kids are here to teach us, that like
Yes.
we have it backwards, that we're here to teach our kids and
Mm-hmm.
mold our kids, and I believe we're here to guide our kids. I believe we're here to walk with
Of
our kids. I
course.
believe we need to be
Mm-hmm.
parents. It's not that.
Mm-hmm.
But like our kids know who they are. If you watch little kids know who they are. Like they're not
Mm-hmm.
confused. They know what they want. They know what
Mm-hmm.
they don't want. They know what they love. They know what makes them happy. Like little kids are a great example for us to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
They're not ashamed of having needs. They're not ashamed of having wants. They're not ashamed of having wanting cuddles and like when and what it is that they're looking for. They use their voice, you know? And so I think seeing our kids, like, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, like letting them be who they are. Like we need to guide them, but it's like a guidance and like talking. It's the communication, like communicating,
Mm-hmm.
listening, being intentional, being aware. Like what are they trying to tell you? What are they not telling you? Like as they get older, their body language, like the different things, and it's not, it's what you said, like who are they? Not what are they doing? You know, we get so caught up in
Mm-hmm.
busyness and all the externals. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, with helping them to trust themselves, I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can
Mm-hmm.
give them. Like in a situation, well, what do you think you should do? Like, what is your, like, when you go inside, where do you feel that piece of you that's like you? Like, a lot of times it's in your belly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you feel like you're that feeling of like you? Like helping them to even identify that. You know how many adults can't even identify that because we don't teach it. We
Yeah.
don't give them the time to actually feel in their body. And then listening to them, the other
Mhm.
piece, like kids are so great at describing their feelings in their body. Um, it's trying to tell them something, just seeing them,
Mhm.
like looking at it from the perspective, what are they trying to teach me? Like, what am I supposed to
Mhm.
learn from them?
From them.
Because then that in turn, I believe, guides us and how we can help guide them more.
Mhm. Because we're guiding them towards their more of their true self,
Yeah.
right? Than to it's like that paying attention. And I think that's so true. I mean, people will say like there's two kids in a family and they're two
Yeah.
totally different people, but it's like that's how they arrived on the scene, right? So it's like how do we help them navigate that part of them? And yeah, I think that that's I mean, a lot of people know and like my youngest son is disabled and when he was a baby, when we got his diagnosis, he was 1. I remember rocking him and being like, "Who did you come here to be? Like, what are you here to teach me?" Because I had already kind of been through some things in my life to know that there's like, and so I think about that when I look at him because he doesn't talk and I can't know him in that way, but he's got some deep purpose and reason and I could do a podcast and all the things he's taught me, but it's helped me with that curiosity around my kids. Like who are you anyway? Like what are you here to do? And I think that is like a wonder that we can have when we look at our kids that might shift maybe how we act towards them or handle a situation.
Absolutely. And it's that, right? I think that's the other piece. It's the key piece. They're not us. They're not here
Mhm.
to serve us. Like,
Mhm.
let them
Yeah.
be who they are. Like, I think that's the other thing. Like, we
Mhm.
want to mold them into what we believe or what we think
Mm.
or what we see or like we did this. So they're not us. They're them.
Mhm.
Like, so
Mhm.
what does that look like, right? And
Mhm.
fostering a safe place for them to discover that. And this is the other piece. I think when people lose connection with themselves and then they're on autopilot, they start living through their kids. And so that's
Oh,
another
yes.
indication of, hey, maybe I need to come back. If I'm putting so much of my focus on my kids, and really like an unhealthy focus, right? Not like,
Right.
but like
Right.
maybe I can bring that back to me and figure out what's missing in my life. So I can let them
Mm.
really develop and be who they are and not put all of my hopes and dreams in them, right? Like I can actually put my hopes and dreams
Mhm.
in myself still. I don't care how old you are. I just
Mhm.
watched a woman who was
Right.
106 competing in a swimming competition. You can do anything you want anytime you want.
Right. Anytime you want. Well, then it doesn't really matter, like, if they're the best basketball player or if they do this or if they make this baseball team or this and that, because I mean, clearly that's something in our culture that people are very wrapped up in. And it's really fun because my kids are involved
Of
in some of those
course.
things, but it's also like, again, are they created to do that? Do they love that? Is that a self-led thing in them? Like my son who's a runner, I mean, it's all him. He's up at 6 every morning. He's doing it. It's his passion. It's one of his gifts. I don't have to push him to do it. He just wants to do it. And then he wants me to be there to watch him. So then I know like I don't but I think I see a lot of times in parents where it's like they're manufacturing
Mhm.
this thing. And I think maybe that's like a something, just an awareness piece, like for all of us as we're kind of listening to this conversation, it's like, what am I
Yeah.
manufacturing that maybe just doesn't want to be in my life, whether it's a relationship or anything? It's like, what am I forcing? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, what am I
Mhm.
forcing that is not working or moving? I mean, that's, I think, a message.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
question for all of us to ask ourselves. Like
Yeah.
it's like what am I forcing? What isn't working? What am I tolerating? Like what feels good? What doesn't feel good? Like those are evaluation questions that we should always be asking ourselves, I believe.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I totally do. And I've loved this conversation because I think it's so important for us to like dig deep into ourselves. I know for me it's like where I've become a more fulfilled person, and then it's also like informed the things that I have felt called to do at different seasons in my life. And so I love that you're Like all of these things I think are so foundational for us as women and as humans if we want to live like a full life, which I think people really, really want to do. And so I always ask all of my guests 2 questions at the end of the podcast. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, if you don't mind. So I'm going to grab those. I guess one is like, what is one belief or practice that has helped you get from where you were to where you are today? So is there like one like foundational belief you're like, this is how I've gotten here?
Absolutely. So it's meditation and then like
Mm-hmm.
reading like on consciousness and energetics and spirituality.
Mm. Do you have like a book that you love that you would love to share with
So
people?
I do. I actually have 2 that are foundational for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's so beat up. But this is like the Abundance book by John Randolph Price, and I have no cards that fall out. So John Randolph Price is an amazing spiritual author. But the Abundance book, it's a lot about wealth consciousness, but you can apply it to like just spiritual consciousness, and it's just God is our source. I mean, that's like the overall piece of it.
Yep.
And then the other piece, Paul Selig is, so these are like my like go. So this is a second book. I Am Word is his first book. This is the Book of Love and Creation. They're channeled texts. You can kind of look up what that means. But yeah, that and my meditations, which for me also includes like prayer. But those are where I am, why.
That helps you. And I'm curious, like, what is one thing that you love about yourself? Back to self-love, because of hardships or disappointments that you have faced. So what is something you could say, like, I love this about Elizabeth because it's been built through adversity?
Yeah, like I just don't take no. Like I don't give up. Like, I mean, I think that that's the one thing through everything that I know about myself. Like, I don't say in certain areas of my life I'm fully stepping into it because that's still part of my journey, but I
Sure.
know I'm capable of anything. Like I know I am capable of creating anything and handling anything because it's been given. Again, is there areas of my life that needs to be strengthened and worked on? Absolutely. And that's part
Sure.
of where that's part of my journey right now.
Part of the journey. Yeah. And I think I love that you're so transparent about that, because even when we're coaching people and helping people and mentoring people, we're still growing as humans ourselves. We still have mentors and coaches and people who are helping us to kind of level up. I think we're always learning. And I love that you showcase that part of yourself, because I think that that's like such a good model for those who are wanting that in their life as well. I love that you do that. So before we go, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. So my website is probably the best. So that's www.sacredfreedom.life. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And I have an email. You can sign up for that on my website. So,
And you have a
oh
podcast.
gosh,
You have a podcast.
how about that? How about we go with
Yes, we forgot.
that? Yes, thank you, Jessica. Yes, I have a podcast called The
Yeah.
Sacred Journey, and I do different series within that. So I have it's called Release Your Relationship series, is all about conscious uncoupling. I'm about to launch a new series called The Sacred Sanctuary, which is about combining interior design with emotional growth work. So
Ooh, I love
yeah,
that. That's
and then the
awesome.
sacred journey just is about this journey. So that we're all on.
Mm.
So, but yeah.
Well, I love that. Well, we will link all of these things in the show notes, and I'll also pop those 2 books in there too, so people can check those out if they want. Thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing this time with me. It's been I feel like we could have talked for hours. This is such important and beautiful work that you're doing. And so thank you for sharing time with us today.
Jessica, I appreciate being on here, and you and the work that you do is amazing. And I always love our conversations. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Heartstrong. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and applicable to your life. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Before I go, this is just a quick reminder that I believe in you, and I believe that you too have the ability to become heartstrong. I'll chat with you soon.